Let me start by apologizing for not being here yesterday. I flew in last night from Paris. I was speaking at the World Society on Information Systems Plus 10 UNESCO conference, and I have a little story to tell you from that that's going to take me right into my point, actually. I gave a talk on the status of the media in the Arab world, primarily focusing on new media, which is one of my research specialities, the link between traditional media and new media, and the status of press freedom in our countries. Well-attended speech, very enthusiastic young man in the first row, first person to ask for the word in the Q&A session, gave a very passionate 5-minute speech about the unprecedented times of freedom that we now live in Egypt in terms of the media, and how we've never experienced anything like this before, and things couldn't be. He turned out to be self-identified as a member of the Egypt UNESCO delegation, a member of the Egyptian delegation to the UNESCO, which kind of explains what actually didn't explain too much, but but yeah, I'm not sure which planet he's on, but at any rate, I would hate to say that I heard some analogy to that this morning in some of the comments that were made here, which would lead me to make a very strong point, and it has to do with the advocacy, again, component that Andreu mentioned. And I think it's of absolute importance that we talk about this, and that we talk about it very strongly and very clearly, and we take a very strong stand on it. My answer to the gentleman was that there is nothing of actually freedom of expression happening now in Egypt. If anything, it's severely retracting. What's happening is not absolute freedom. What's happening is defying authority. People are defying authority, and people are paying the price in blood for defying authority. And we need to be very, very clear about that, and very clear about the differences, and very clear about the differences between responsibility and ethics and press freedom. We are in a time of very, severe turbulence in some of these countries in the Middle East. Most of us are fighting for what should be a very instrumental and a very historical change. I mean, we're trying to enter a whole new era of freedom and dignity for humanity, literally, in the Middle East, and it's something that is unprecedented, I think, in this part of the world, and maybe in the whole world. So there is no gray area in my mind. There is no, I mean, the word objectivity in the media, with all due respect to objectivity in the media, takes on a whole new meaning here. When you're standing by and watching an army vehicle run over a protester, and you want to get both sides of the story, that's fine to interview an army person, but you can't really say we're not sure what happened. You have a picture right there. It's very clear. You have a video. You can't be neutral here. You can't stand on the sidelines and say, I'm just observing. You really can't do that. I'm not saying you have to take a very strong side as a journalist. I understand that there are standards, and I understand that we need to abide by the standards. But we live in a very different times in the Middle East that I think will make it necessary for journalists, for each and every single journalist, to choose his or her own standards, but to keep in mind that there is a certain level of passivity rather than neutrality that could be dragged under the word neutral or objective, and we need to be very clear about that. And we need to be very clear that what's happening in the Middle East, what's happening in Egypt and in Tunisia and in Libya and in most of the Arab countries, particularly the Arab countries in transition, there is no freedoms being granted there. Any bit of freedom that you observe as readers or as viewers of the media in the Middle East was a bit of freedom that was grabbed by the journalists. It was not granted by the governments. It was grabbed by the journalists despite the governments. And it was grabbed, and we paid the price for it in blood. There are martyrs that have fallen for us to be able to say or write what we want to say or write. And I think it's very important to make that point very clearly and very loudly. In Egypt, for example, every day there are now court cases against journalists. Every day journalists go on television, they still go on television, they still say what they want, they still write what they want in newspapers. They pay the price for it. There are court orders against journalists, there are court cases filed every day, they are taken to military trials, they pay 20,000 and 30,000 pound bail just while the case is on, just to be able to go home at the end of the evening, and there are no guarantees that they are going home at the end of the evening. That is not press freedom. Press freedom is to be able to say what you want and know that you are guaranteed that you are going to go home at the end of the evening. If you are doing your job with that much threat on your shoulder, that there is absolutely no press freedom here. It's actually unprecedented times of lack of press freedom is what we're at. And I'll refer you actually to a very interesting article which I just read, The Brotherhood versus the Free Press by Mr. Hani Shukrallah here in foreign policy. He, of course, has a wonderful experience in that regard. He can tell you how he paid the price for it. But any decent journalist now in Egypt who chooses to do their job properly and write in what observers might think is press freedom is going under a severe threat of losing their lives or their jobs or their safety. They are being kidnapped, they are being tortured, they are being beaten, they are being dragged on the streets and left naked in the middle of nowhere. There are all types of dangers happening to journalists in the Middle East. So there is no press freedom, and I don't think we should be mistaking press freedom for defying authority, and I don't think we should be mistaking responsibility or ethics with press freedom and with pushing the limits for press freedom. I think it's very important that we do that. I am telling you that because I think there are two things that need to happen for journalists on both sides of the Mediterranean, anywhere really, in order for you to be able to do your jobs. Number one, of course, you need to have the skills to do the job properly, and so we'll talk about professional training, and we'll talk about how we can all benefit from each other, and we'll talk about research. These are all very important things. You also need to know the culture that you're covering in order to give some context to what you're covering, and in order to give the right or the correct context to what you're covering, and you need to include the whole society. So there's an emphasis on diversity, and it's very important. It's a very important component of that. But there also needs to be a guarantee on press freedom so that you know that you can do your job without the threat of any of these multiple things that I just mentioned happening to you at the end of the day. So I think we should all, this is a great opportunity, and you know, Andrea just laid for us the skeleton of what's going to happen in Marseille. And I think there's a very good opportunity here that we have to take for pushing the limits of press freedom. Each and every single one of us can do something. You can write about it, you can talk about it, you can exercise your right as a journalist, insist on your right to press freedom, even if it's at high cost. And we all know there's a high cost to it. We all know that. I'll insert another very small story coming here, because this trip has been full of stories. I was going out of the Cairo airport. You know, the guy who stamps my passport, the officer, has this very weird look on his face as I come in. And it was early morning, and I was like, good morning, you know. And the guy just gave me this very weird look, and I said, anything wrong? I actually said, why don't you smile, you know? And you know, in a jokingly kind of way, and he said, no, you got me very wrong on that. Inti zalamtini, he said in Arabic. What's the right translation? Any Arab speakers? You're doing me a great, yeah, you're being unfair to me. Thank you. And so I said, you know, okay, whatever. And he stamped the passport, and then he looks at me and goes, that was a very strong interview you gave on television a couple of days ago. And I said, okay. And I was about to say, oh, you mean the one where I insulted the Ministry of Interior? But I was very surprised that the guy actually took notice of the face of, you know, the person who spoke on television, and he still remembers what I said about the ministry and about the officers and about. And I was like, but in the back of my mind, you know, I couldn't help. I smiled, of course, and took my passport and went on to board. But I just, in the back of my mind, was wondering, you know what? This guy has the right now to take me into a room and keep me in there for 24 hours. or for 2 weeks. You know, I mean, this guy literally has the right to do that. I hope he was, you know, taken in by the fact that I'm a professor at the American University in Cairo, and I'm going to a UNESCO conference and an Anna Lindh Foundation or whatever, so maybe he was a little bit, you know, maybe that made a difference, I have no idea. But my first thought was, you know, if I didn't have these credentials, what would happen to me? What would happen to me is what happens to Egyptians every single day in military courts and in police officers in police stations in Cairo. That's what happens every day. And that's what happens every day to journalists who dare to do their job. And it's a threat. It's a threat we're all under, but it's a threat we all have to fight. If we keep thinking about these things, no one is going to do their job. We have to keep fighting it. So please, I know everyone in this room does that already, so I'm probably, you know, preaching to the wrong party here, but please stick to it. It's very important. It's a very important fight. We're fighting for freedom. We're fighting for humanity. Please stick to it. Very briefly, then on the training and skills side of it, I think again we have a wonderful opportunity with all these partnerships to sort of exchange experiences, not just in terms of taking a training course or organizing a workshop or something of the sort, but to actually physically exchange journalists, you know, journalists from the southern part of the Mediterranean going to the northern part, seeing firsthand how the newsrooms function, how the television stations functions, how the editorial decisions are made, and also for people from the northern side of the Mediterranean to come to the south and see the societies firsthand and experience the cultures firsthand. It's very important. Somebody made the comment this morning to not just follow political parties, to follow the civil society, actually to just follow the people on the street. Right now, at least in Egypt, and I would dare say in Tunisia, the political parties do not represent the people on the ground. It's the people on the ground who represent themselves. Talk to people. The societies are so diverse. We just launched the third report out of a 4-series report with the Media Diversity Institute. We're looking at diversity in the media in coverage of, you know, certain important events in Egypt. 3 reports that I've conducted so far. The first one had a representation of women 6.5% in 4 of the major newspapers, daily newspapers in Egypt. Second report, 6.8%. Third report, 4.2%. Come on, for God's sakes. Nobody talks to women in the Arab world, you know. I mean, where's the other 50% of, you know, and so it's no surprise, of course, when you have a parliament and then you have under 2% representation of women in the parliament, because you don't get to see them on television, you don't get to see them in newspapers, you don't get to see them portrayed as professionals, you get to see them, you know, at the household, and so it's very easy to just realize that, you know, okay, they play the role somewhere else, we'll get a man in the parliament. So please, when you're out on the street, make sure to know the culture and make sure to talk to the whole society, not just parts of the society. There are elements of the society that are totally out of everyone's vision. You know, people with disabilities, elderly people. I mean, sectors of society that we don't hear about whatsoever, which I think is very, very important. So celebrate diversity. And celebrate freedom and fight for them. They are very important. This is what's going to make it or break it. Again, we're fighting for humanity. We're fighting for freedom. It's probably the most important fight we're ever going to go through, and I hope we all stick to it. Thank you very much.